Francesca had never once resented her fate, until now. She couldn't stop wondering why things always turned out this way for her. In her previous life, all she ever wanted was a quiet, ordinary existence. But even after being reborn into another world, chaos still found her. This time, she was standing before two thieves. Her patience was already thin. They'd promised they would never steal again. Yet, instead of apologizing, one of them lunged at her, fist raised. Francesca didn't flinch. She wasn't just any ordinary girl. With swift precision, she seized his arm and slammed him to the ground. The sharp crack of breaking bone echoed through the air. Calmly, she told them that no matter the reason, stealing money was never justified. Then, she added, almost as a warning, that this area belonged to the Calvino family. Outsiders caught committing crimes here would face punishment without mercy. The second thief, panicked, begged his brother to stop fighting, but surrendering meant losing their only chance to pay for their little sister's treatment. Francesca let out a quiet sigh. She knew that in certain districts, people couldn't survive without stealing. Somehow, she felt that this was her family's fault too. A voice called out behind her. Graziano, her childhood friend and loyal butler, handed her a rolled parchment. She read it briefly, then asked for a knife. Without hesitation, she cut her thumb and pressed her bleeding finger onto the document, sealing it with her blood. Francesca approached the thieves and apologized for being harsh. She told them it wasn't worth catching the eye of someone from the underworld and urged them not to become scoundrels, even if it was to protect someone they loved. Then, she handed them the parchment and a map, directions to a hospital. With that letter, their treatment would be free of charge. The thieves were stunned. One of them asked who she really was. Francesca froze, awkwardly smiled, and stammered out a ridiculous excuse before they could question her further. She turned away, waving goodbye, while Graziano followed behind with an exasperated sigh, half chuckling at her bad habits. After all, the Calvinos were one of the 5 great families that secretly support the country in Underworld, and Francesca was the daughter of their head. Someone of her standing wasn't supposed to act like that. But Francesca protested, insisting she had no intention of living in the underworld or repeating the same mistakes from her previous life. What she didn't realize was that someone was watching her from a high building nearby, a young man, smirking to himself, eager to toy with her. Her fiancé. Later, inside the carriage, Graziano accused her of being terrible at hiding her identity. Francesca defended herself, saying she only chased them because they looked suspicious. It wasn't a convincing excuse, but she quickly added that once she transferred to the Royal Academy, she planned to enjoy her days as an ordinary noble's daughter. In her previous life, both her parents had died when she was still a child, leaving her in the care of her grandfather, who turned out to be the head of a powerful Yakuza group. Every evening when she came home, she'd be greeted by a crowd of intimidating men. At 5 years old, she found it fun. All those scary-looking men treated her kindly. Some even asked about her day at school, and she'd tell them everything, full of excitement. Especially about an art assignment where she had to draw her family. She proudly drew everyone in the house on a large sheet of paper, bringing those hardened men to tears. To Francesca, they were a warm, loving family. But when she brought that drawing to school, everyone else saw something different. The teachers and students were terrified. Parents told their children to stay away from her. Whenever Francesca went out with her bodyguards, things always ended the same way. They would defend her fiercely, and everyone around would only grow more terrified. To fix the situation, she'd try to distract them, pretending she wanted to play somewhere else. But even in public parks, there wasn't a single place where people didn't fear her and her entourage. In the end, she'd give up and ask to play at home instead. Francesca had long realized that her family wasn't normal. Every morning and afternoon, at least 5 intimidating men would escort her to and from school. Yet despite all that security, kidnappings were almost routine. Sometimes though, she managed to escape on her own, knocking out the kidnappers and finding her own way home. When she was younger, she'd once accidentally destroyed an important document sealed with blood. By the time she reached high school, she'd finally understood who her grandfather truly was, a man both feared and respected across the underworld, known as a chivalrous crime boss. Some despised him, but most admired him deeply. When Francesca asked him about it, her grandfather only laughed it off, saying it was just a rumor. Yet, behind his calm smile, there was guilt that his granddaughter had grown up lonely because of him. He couldn't ignore how on Christmas Eve, she spent her time not with friends, but alone, playing games in her room. That night, she was immersed in a popular otome game. She wished she had friends to share it with, but there was no one. Still, despite her loneliness, she loved her grandfather dearly. All she ever wanted, if she could be reborn, was to live a normal life surrounded by friends. Then, from behind her, familiar voices called out. 3 of her grandfather's men appeared. They were cheerful, eager to celebrate Christmas together, filling the quiet house with warmth and laughter. But the moment didn't last. A man suddenly vaulted over the garden wall, rushing straight toward her grandfather. Francesca spun around, instinctively recognizing the intruder, and saw the glint of a weapon in his hand. Without thinking, she ran forward, shielding her grandfather from the gunshot. All she could feel was the burning pain in her stomach. Her vision blurred, her breath faltered, and the last thing she saw was her grandfather is safe, and the cracked phone screen showing the otome game she'd been playing just moments before. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on a strange bed, surrounded by frantic maids. Everything felt unfamiliar. The memories of her death came rushing back. She had been shot. And now, somehow, she had been reborn as Francesca Calvino, the daughter of one of the 5 ruling underworld families. Here, attempted kidnappings were an everyday occurrence. But soon she realized something even stranger. This was the very world of the otome game she had played before dying. A Western-style world without trains, where guns were more common than swords, and some people were born with special skills. Francesca climbed out of bed and stared at her reflection in the mirror. Red hair, pale blue eyes. There was no mistaking it. She had become the heroine of that game. The kingdom had long been ruled by a monarchy, its power balanced by 5 aristocratic families that secretly governed the underworld. The game's story revolved around them, and now she was part of one. That was the problem. She had been reborn into a powerful family where no one could truly be trusted. Just like in her past life, she feared she'd end up isolated again, unable to make friends. But this time, she swore she wouldn't let that happen. She would change her fate. From what she remembered, the story began when the heroine turned 17. She would be forced into an underworld war by the orders of her fiancé, Leonardo. Because of constant kidnapping threats, Francesca had grown up secluded, living quietly until 16. By the time the game's story began, she was portrayed as helpless, a girl with no power of her own. But she doesn't want to be those heroine. She possessed a unique skill, the power to amplify another person's abilities many times over for a short while. She refused to rely on others like the game's version of her. Even if she had to face chaos, she wanted the strength to stand on her own. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about her old family, the grandfather and men who had loved her despite everything. The thought of them finding out she died tore at her heart. Tears welled in her eyes as regret washed over her. Why did she have to leave them first? Francesca wiped her tears away, holding on to their kindness in her heart. She wouldn't forget them. All she could do now was live happily, just as her grandfather had always wished. Returning to the main story, Francesca finally arrived at the mansion. She and Graziano stepped down from the carriage, and as soon as the doors opened, a dozen maids and butlers lined up to greet them. It reminded her of the days when she used to be welcomed home by her Yakuza family. At the far end of the grand lobby, her father stood, seemingly punishing someone. When he turned around, he simply asked if anything had happened during the trip. Francesca could only sweat drop at the sight, pretending not to notice the trembling man pinned under her father's foot. She quickly changed the subject, asking what was going on. Calvino, her father, with his usual cold and furious expression, explained that the man had committed a grave sin. Apparently, while putting away Francesca's clothes, he had been shot in the stomach, and his blood had stained her school uniform. A minor incident, but for Calvino, even that was enough to cause chaos. Francesca sighed in exhaustion. The ridiculous part wasn't just her father's reaction. The head butler even declared that the man should be executed for ruining the young lady's school life. Francesca shouted in frustration, saying she didn't care about the uniform and ordered them to call a healer to treat the poor man. No matter how hard she tried to live a normal life, it was impossible. Everyone already recognized her as a full-fledged member of the underworld. Her father, despite his cold demeanor, doted on her in his own way, and the entire household treated her as the heir of the Calvino family. But time was running out. Next week marked the beginning of the main story, and it would start with her being kidnapped by her villainous fiancé. A week later, Francesca spent her afternoon strolling through the bustling city, enjoying the sight of merchants and citizens thriving under the protection of the 5 great families. Among them was the Aldini family, led by her fiancé, Leonardo, the greatest villain of the game's story. He was depicted as a man of charisma and unmatched power, someone who could charm anyone for his own gain. In the game, he was unobtainable but overwhelmingly popular character, infamous for the moment he told the heroine that he would one day kill her. Francesca wanted nothing to do with him. She planned to avoid Leonardo at all costs. As she continued her walk, she began to sense someone watching her since she left the mansion. Moments later, a carriage sped toward her from behind. Its door burst open, and a strong hand reached out, yanking her inside. The crowd screamed at the sight of the kidnapping. But Francesca had already anticipated this event. She braced herself against the door, glancing inside the carriage. Leonardo wasn't there. That meant these men were only his thug. Taking advantage of the chaos, Francesca slipped free of the man gripping her skirt belt, leapt from the moving carriage, and rolled several times across the road before landing safely. Pleased with her escape, she decided to head home. In her mind, surviving the game's opening scenario meant she was safe from danger. According to the story, the kidnapping would trigger a power struggle among the 5 families, something Leonardo had orchestrated from the shadows. As long as she could avoid crossing paths with him, Francesca believed everything would be fine. On her way home, Francesca suddenly realized her hat was missing. It must have fallen off during her escape. With a sigh, she turned back to look for it. But before she could take another step, a voice called out from behind, asking if she was looking for her hat. Francesca froze. When she turned around, her eyes widened in disbelief. The next thing she knew, a strong arm pulled her upward, seating her firmly on the lap of the man riding the horse, Leonardo. He wore a sly smile as he leaned closer, the air between them sharp with danger and charm. He had finally caught the elusive girl who'd slipped through his grasp. Francesca swallowed hard, stunned that she had still ended up face to face with her greatest enemy. With a smirk, Leonardo roughly placed the hat back on her head before urging his horse forward at full speed. Francesca screamed as the wind whipped past them, panic flooding her chest, but Leonardo only laughed. To him, her fiery reaction was amusing, refreshing even. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was dealing with a truly living person. Francesca froze, despair washing over her. She barely had time to cry, her carefully laid plans shattering in an instant. She thrashed in his arms, shouting his name in anger, as Leonardo murmured something chilling with that same magnetic smile, then followed it with a dry, amused laugh. Leonardo brought Francesca to his mansion. For someone branded a villain, he still had manners, helping her down from the horse before casually remarking that she could try to escape if she wanted. Francesca declined, saying it would only tire her out. Before he could reply, she cut in sharply, asking him to get straight to the point and explain why he'd brought her there. Leonardo only chuckled, low and amused, then led her inside. Since this was their first meeting, he said, they might as well consider it an introduction. Though reluctant, Francesca followed. Leonardo Aldini was the sole heir and young head of the family, and had the same age as Francesca, but vastly different. When he was 10, both his father and older brother died. Normally, a child that young would be placed under a guardian and turned into a puppet for the adults. But Leonardo was different. At 10, he already possessed every talent needed to survive in the underworld. A clear mind, a fearless heart, cold, calculating, and trusting no one, he single-handedly ruled over his family's adults with an authority beyond his years. As she sat down, Francesca recalled how, in the original game, she was supposed to be taken to a warehouse by the docks. Yet, here she was, inside Leonardo's personal hideout instead. Out of nowhere, Leonardo asked why she wasn't crying or screaming for help. With bitter calm, Francesca replied that kidnappers shouldn't ask such things. Her remark made him burst into laughter. She added that being kidnapped was nothing new to her. She could easily gauge how serious her captor was about killing her. Without waiting for a response, she firmly requested that their engagement be annulled. Leonardo scoffed. That was nearly impossible, he said. It was a promise made by their grandfathers, and besides, their marriage was politically beneficial. Among the 5 major families, Francesca's was the closest to the royal household, while the Aldinis valued strength above all. Their overwhelming military power brought them vast profits and influence. Yet because their lineage was the shortest, they were often looked down upon. Francesca studied him sharply, as if reading his thoughts. She said she didn't care what their grandfathers had decided. From Leonardo's perspective, there seemed to be no real benefit to their engagement anyway. Leonardo stayed silent, his cold gaze confirming her words. She could tell. His mind was rational, pragmatic, unmoved by sentiment or legacy. Then, without warning, Leonardo sat beside her and pulled her close. His smile turned predatory as he said he genuinely wanted to hurt her. With a cunning glint, he added that he wanted her to suffer, to make her run to her father and beg him to feel that same pain. His hand brushed against her neck, slow and deliberate. He said he would prefer if she cried. It would create a tragic atmosphere, stir sympathy among the other families. A chill ran down Francesca's spine. Leonardo's aura had changed. She could feel it. His intent was real. He could kill her with his bare hands if he wished. Then he declared that this was the role she would play, the part he had chosen for her, and that because of it, she was useful to him. He tightened his grip around her throat as he said he had no intention of breaking their engagement. Finally, his expression softened into a serene, practiced smile, as though nothing had happened. He made sure his fiancée understood his command perfectly, waiting for Francesca to fight back. But instead, she met his gaze calmly and said his plan would never work. Hurting her, she continued, was only the first step in his scheme to shatter the fragile balance between the 5 great families. Without fear, Francesca grabbed his wrist, the same one strangling her, and declared that his plan would fail. No matter what he did, she would never run crying to her father. With a swift movement, she tore his hand away and glared up at him. She said she wouldn't rely on anyone else to seek revenge on her behalf. Then, she grabbed his tie and pulled him closer, her tone sharp as a blade. People, she said, should take responsibility for what happens to them, just as her grandfather once told her. Her eyes burned with conviction, fearless and unwavering. If she ever needed vengeance, she'd claim it with her own hands. Her defiance drew a low laugh from Leonardo. He hadn't expected this girl to be so bold. Smirking, he admitted it might not be easy to break her spirit after all. Then, to her surprise, he pulled out a gun and handed it to her. Before she could react, he pointed it toward his own chest and told her to pull the trigger. If she killed him now, he said, she'd be safe. But if she refused, well, then she'd just have to endure whatever pain he decided to inflict. Francesca rolled her eyes at the ridiculous dare. Leonardo taunted her, saying he thought the daughter of a crime family wouldn't be scared of a little bloodshed. Instead of aiming at him, Francesca turned the gun on herself. Her eyes never left his, and then, without a flicker of hesitation, she pulled the trigger. A hollow click, no bullet. Francesca exhaled sharply. The gun was fake. She could tell just from its weight. Leonardo gave a thin, amused smile, clearly impressed. She knew this kind of trick all too well. In her previous life, she'd grown to despise such weapons. Her grandfather's thug used to lie, said carry fake guns to scare people. She had learned to tell the difference by the color, the weight, the feel of the metal. Handing the gun back, Francesca told him that if he really wanted to intimidate someone, he shouldn't let them hold the weapon. Real or fake, it was dangerous. Leonardo shook his head, half in disbelief, half entertained by her complete lack of fear. He smiled, whether genuinely or out of intrigue, no one could tell, and said it would be a shame to end their engagement now. She was far too interesting to throw away. Francesca snapped, accusing him of planning to use her for something vile. She called his laugh creepy, which only made him chuckle more. He said a girl brave enough to say that to his face was actually quite cute. Then, with deliberate carelessness, he tossed the fake gun out the window. A crash followed, the sound of someone falling and glass shattering. Francesca assumed it was one of Leonardo's men, but he corrected her with a faint smile. It was a spy from another family who'd been tailing them. He claimed he had no intention of flaunting their first meeting, though every word out of his mouth dripped with lies. Leonardo brought the topic back to what mattered. Breaking off their engagement wasn't an option. Even if they operated in the underworld, they were still nobles of the country, and political marriages were part of their duty. Francesca, clearly frustrated, explained that she had only wanted an amicable termination agreed upon by both parties. But instead, Leonardo twisted her intention into an excuse for some nasty scheme. Her fiancé actually clapped, amused that she managed to catch on so quickly. After a short pause, he asked why such a clever fiancé wanted to end a marriage that was so beneficial. His sharp gaze turned accusatory as he questioned whether she was planning to marry into another family. If that happened, the Calvinos and other families could easily destroy his house. Francesca immediately cut him off, shouting that wasn't the reason. She didn't want to marry anyone from any family. If she married someone from the underworld, she'd never have a normal, peaceful life. Her words left Leonardo confused and slightly taken aback. A bit embarrassed, Francesca admitted she just wanted to have friends and live quietly. In her past life, she knew that a Yakuza wife often acted as her husband's stand-in during crises, and she was sure the same applied in this game-like world. Determined to avoid every possible storyline from the game, Francesca wanted nothing more than to stay out of Leonardo's affairs, break off their engagement, and steer clear of all the game's other male leads. That was her one simple wish. Leonardo gave a soft, amused smile. He understood her meaning. She wanted to live in the surface world, but he reminded her that it was almost impossible. Even the marrow of her bones belonged to the underworld. Francesca scowled. She knew he didn't take her seriously and thought her words were nothing but a joke. Deciding she'd had enough, she turned to leave. Before stepping out, she said marrying her would be pointless anyway. She had no useful skills and would only be a burden to him in the future. In that world, a person's rarity determined how many skills they could use. The nobler the blood, the greater the power. Commoners had no skills at all, while higher ranks gained more. 1 skill at level 3, 2 at level 4, and 3 at the highest level, 5. Back in her previous life, Francesca remembered her friend saying that once all the game's stories were complete, Leonardo would become a level 5 character. She'd been curious about what skills he possessed, but she was never close enough to find out. Still, she knew that having, or lacking, skills defined one's entire status in this world. She warned Leonardo that their children might not have any, and she didn't want to be blamed for it later. With a confident smile, Francesca waved goodbye, adding that she wouldn't tell her father about that day's kidnapping. Leonardo didn't respond. He simply gave a quiet, cold laugh as he watched her leave through the window. That night at the Calvino estate, Francesca sat beneath the soft glow of her lamp, her eyes gleaming with joy as she read a letter. The reason for her happiness traced back to the game's original storyline. In the game's prologue, her kidnapping was supposed to serve as the tutorial event. Leonardo's men would capture her, leave her at the docks, and she would remain unharmed. A male character from one of the 4 noble families would then appear to save her. At that point, players were meant to choose one of the 4 families, spin the revolver cylinder up to 10 times, and receive a random character from that family with a guaranteed rarity of 4 or higher. That character would then become both her savior and the player's companion for the tutorial battle. In short, it was an unavoidable event. The heroine would always be rescued by one of the game's main heroes. But Francesca had managed to completely skip that encounter. She had avoided the tutorial without ever meeting a single hero. More importantly, the letter she held now proved that her plan had worked better than expected. Originally, she was supposed to enroll in the same academy as her rescuer, but instead of being sent to one of the 4 hero academies, her new letter of admission placed her in a 5th, completely unknown school. It was the perfect outcome, proof that her interference had changed the story's path. She hadn't expected her plan to succeed so flawlessly. Even better, she could continue hiding her true skill. 7 years ago, her father had warned her to conceal it from everyone. Only the 2 of them knew of its existence. He had been overly protective ever since the first kidnapping attempt, terrified someone might target her again. Now that she was being transferred to a nameless academy, she could keep her identity as a Calvino hidden, and everything would go smoothly. Still, Leonardo's parting words, his promise that he'd find her again, lingered in her mind, unsettling her. Francesca tried to shake off the anxiety by focusing on the game's canon events. Even if Leonardo was enrolled in the academy, his top grades exempted him from regular classes. She convinced herself there was nothing to worry about. Excited for her first day, she rehearsed how she'd introduce herself, speak naturally, and act friendly. Maybe she'd even make a new friend. Reality, however, had other plans. The moment she stepped into her classroom the next morning, her face turned pale. At the far end of the room, a boy waved at her with a sly smile, murmuring a soft, "Good morning." Of course, it was the villain himself, Leonardo. Her introduction went awkwardly as she stammered, flustered by his sudden appearance. Forced to sit beside him, Francesca leaned in and whispered through gritted teeth, demanding to know why he was in her class. Leonardo merely shrugged. It was she, after all, who had transferred into his. Worse, whispers rippled through the room. Her classmates were stunned to see Leonardo attending class again after so long, and soon they began speculating about his connection to the new girl. Francesca knew this would happen the moment they crossed paths again. Frustrated, she told her fiancé to stay away from her, but Leonardo refused. Instead, he leaned closer and handed her something. It was a soft strip of fabric. He whispered low against her ear that it was the ribbon she had lost from her dress a few days ago. Startled by his closeness and the words that sounded far too suggestive, Francesca scrambled for an excuse. She forced a smile, commented that the weather was lovely, and muttered something about taking a walk outside before he could accidentally fall asleep on her shoulder. Then, flustered and red-faced, she made a swift exit from the classroom. Even in the school lobby, Leonardo wouldn't stop following her, driving Francesca to the brink of frustration. She finally spun around, snapping at him in anger. His earlier teasing might have been part of his twisted schemes, but saying things like that so casually in public was downright humiliating. Still, Francesca forced herself to stay polite, muttering a stiff "thank you" through gritted teeth. Leonardo chuckled, amused by the sight of her thanking him so furiously. He reached out and gently brushed her hair, offering a mock apology. Francesca refused to fall for his act and quickly swatted his hand away. His charming facade vanished instantly, replaced by that familiar, cold, irritated expression. Turning away, Francesca tried to calm herself. Only now did it truly sink in. Since she had avoided choosing any of the 4 families during the tutorial, she must have been assigned to a class that didn't exist in the original game. That meant she had no way of predicting what would happen next. Leonardo broke the silence, his tone shifting as he asked why she had introduced herself as Trovato. Francesca rolled her eyes, explaining that she was simply hiding her real identity. Trovato was her late mother's surname. Then Leonardo asked another question. If she really wanted to stay hidden, why enroll in an academy in the capital instead of another city where it would be safer? Francesca nearly slipped, almost revealing the real reason. In the game's story, Leonardo would soon trigger an incident so massive it would shake the Royal Academy and the entire capital. In the original timeline, she and her companions would have fought to resolve it together. But because she had chosen to stay out of the story this time, she no longer knew what would come next. She had wanted a peaceful life, far away from the chaos of the original plot. Yet, by altering the course of the story for her own sake, she couldn't help but feel responsible for whatever consequences might follow, just as her grandfather had always taught her. Then, Leonardo called her name. His voice was quiet, still cold, but tinged with something faintly vulnerable. He asked if she hated him. Francesca looked at him, a flicker of guilt passing through her eyes, but it faded as she remembered who he really was. She shot back that it was hard not to, considering he hadn't exactly tried to make a good impression since the moment they met. Leonardo gave a dry laugh, acknowledging her point. With that same unnerving calm, he told her that if she truly didn't want to marry him, it would be easier to just kill him instead. Francesca sighed in exhaustion at his twisted logic. Stepping closer, she placed a hand on his cheek, a clear warning. She met his eyes sharply and told him, without words, that his wicked plans would never go the way he wanted. He needed to remember that. Leonardo's hand shot up, gripping hers firmly. He smirked, saying she looked cute when she was being fierce. The school bell suddenly rang, breaking the tension. Francesca instinctively told him they should hurry back before they were late. But Leonardo only shrugged, remarking that if they walked in together, she'd draw too much attention. Caught off guard, Francesca blinked, realizing he was right. Without another word, she turned on her heel and rushed back to class alone. Francesca had sensed a strange presence near them earlier. Perhaps Leonardo had too. When it was time to go home, Francesca saw Graziano waiting for her. He immediately recognized from her expression that her attempt to make friends had failed. She excused it as a normal first-day struggle, without revealing that everyone had kept their distance because of Leonardo. Graziano, observing calmly, suggested that she might never truly fit into the surface world, and that learning to take her place as head of the family was far more efficient than ordinary school life. Francesca pouted. She had no intention of letting family duties define her, no matter what. Then, she realized Graziano's class should have ended long ago, and she asked if he had been waiting for her on purpose. Graziano diverted his gaze casually and remarked that the sky was cloudy. The walk to the carriage would be long, so he handed her an umbrella. Francesca laughed, thanking him sincerely. Minutes later, rain began to fall. She insisted they share the umbrella, playfully forcing Graziano to hold it at the top, leaving him slightly embarrassed. She had first met Graziano at the age of 6. Now, he was both attendant and caretaker, his demeanor cool and guarded, yet calm and genuinely kind when it mattered. As they walked, they suddenly paused. Graziano subtly signaled something, and Francesca immediately realized they were being followed. 2 figures trailed them, one of them armed with a gun. No one should have known her true identity at the academy, so the only reason anyone would follow them from their mansion was a deliberate pursuit. Graziano handed her the umbrella again. Francesca insisted to join the fight. Graziano refused. He argued that if anyone saw her fighting, it would make it even harder for her to make friends. Reluctantly, she stepped back. Graziano advanced, removing his coat and slipping on his boxing gloves. He explained that this was his revenge for the earlier incident, when he had been forced to deliver a letter of introduction to the hospital on her behalf instead of being able to confront the thief himself. With steady confidence, he told Francesca to stand back and let him protect her properly, as his role demanded. He tightened his gloves, squared his back, and prepared to fight.